We're starting a new series, Sense and Nonsense. Sense and Nonsense. We've been in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and he's covered so many different things with his disciples on the side of that mountain. They left the crowd, they've gone to the mountain, and the truths that were there that day are the same truths for you and for me, and we've got to lean into that. But sometimes we walk in areas that, yeah, it makes sense to us. This makes sense to me, but then we walk in areas that it seems like it's beyond us. It's beyond our sense. Oftentimes, God takes us beyond our sense, beyond our understanding, we might say. I'll tell you this. The world has basically two ways of looking at this, sense and nonsense. The world would say, well, that seems sensible. Well, that just seems like nonsense. And sometimes the things of God you could look at and you go, God, that just doesn't make sense. But I can tell you this, the things of God at no point are ever nonsense. It may go beyond your senses, but it's not nonsense. Jesus thought this was a big enough deal that this concept and context he thought he should talk to his disciples about, because he knew they, just like us, are prone to sense and nonsense. You know, sometimes we want our faith journey, our faith walk to be in this, encompassed into what we can understand and not go beyond our senses. Because here's the truth, God's going to call you to things. God's going to direct you into things that in the world may seem like nonsense, but in the spiritual realm, it's not nonsense. It's miracle territory. Miracle territory. It's God territory that only if he shows up will it succeed. And that's what he calls us to. And we're to live our life in that respect. We're to live our life in that strength and that understanding. So sense and nonsense. We say things like, I sense that something's wrong. You ever walk up to somebody and you look at them and you kind of know them and you go, something just, you have a sense about it. You can't maybe put your thumb on it. But I sense that something's wrong. So we all have this sense. We say things like, it just makes sense that if you did this or because you did that, that's going to, and we have this understanding. If they would just come to their senses, we say that. I mean, that's how we think. That's how we talk, we think. There's a sense about how we treat each other. There's a sense about how God sees us that we have to key in on, and sometimes that goes beyond our senses. See, God looks at the heart, and that's a totally different perspective, how we look at people, how we sense what justice is, how we sense what needs to happen and why this is happening and values. Jesus begins to talk to his disciples. He had just come off of the understanding last week. The message was on anxiety and worry, and God's got this. And Jesus is continuing this discussion. He says in Matthew 7:1-2, he says, "Judge not, that you not be judged." Notice what he didn't say there. He didn't say, hey, don't judge anything. No, he says, just be careful here, because he brings the warning of and the value of why he said what he said. He says, verse 2, he says, judge not, verse 1, that you not be judged. Verse 2, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. He says, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So he's talking about this understanding of judgment, of how we see each other, how we sense what justice is, how we sense what maybe a solution is and a value and a why in someone's life. And he's telling his disciples, and we got to lean into this, because if we're going to be followers of Christ, that truth is the same for us, that how we look at people, how we judge people is pivotal. It's crucial, because what happens is, Jesus is saying that judgment that you're using, that will be used on you. And you say, that's fine. But careful, because sometimes we have double standards, don't we? We won't even talk about that. You ever get new tires on your car? You ever get new tires, and sometimes you get these new tires, and they do what's called mountain balance. And if you don't balance those tires out, you'll drive down the road going, And some of you are like, my car does that. Okay, it could be your tires out of balance. But there's a whole other thing that has to happen when you put those tires on. Let's say you've been driving on the old tires for a really long time and you put new tires on. Okay, hey, wow, this drives better. But there's another thing that needs to happen, alignment, balance and alignment. Well, the things of God have a balance and alignment to it. Sometimes Jesus is saying here, you can't just be balanced and out of alignment. And you can't just have alignment, but also be unbalanced. What he's saying here, he's talking about this. If you're taking notes, write this down regarding sense and nonsense. Jesus spoke of two measures. Two measures. He said the measure you use with yourself and the measure you use with others. These two measures have to be in balance. They have to be in alignment with what Jesus is teaching, with what Jesus is doing. But I can tell you, with what Jesus is doing and where Jesus is going, oftentimes goes beyond our senses. It's not a fun place, but remember how he started this whole message out, the whole Sermon on the Mount. Whenever you're poor in spirit, just know this, you're blessed. And he goes down through all the Beatitudes. Whenever this happens, whenever you feel low, whenever you feel powerless, whenever you want to use your own strength, but you need to rely on mine, know this, you're blessed. He takes us all the way down, and then he begins to form how we see and how we judge others. And he talks of these two measures that have to be balanced, have to be in alignment, the measure we use with ourselves and the measure we use with others. See, sometimes how we measure ourselves, it's all over the map. Because guilt will do that. Guilt, shame, pride. That'll mess some things up. Somebody who's gone through some rough things, have made some really poor decisions that they're living out those consequences, has so much shame that they may say, I know God can forgive you, but he can't really forgive me. Well, that's a pretty strong difference of measure. Or we may say, look at somebody else's life and we go, that was horrible. That was unforgivable. Yet at the same time, we've probably done some things that maybe somebody else might judge as unforgivable too, because of the pain and the hurt it caused them, and all these measures. And Jesus is saying, beware of this. Be careful. These two measures, how you judge, that's how you will be judged. He didn't say don't judge. He didn't say, hey, look at a situation and skirt it under the rug. He didn't say that. But he said, be aware of these two measures. Paul said it this way, the Apostle Paul, in Ephesians 4:15 through 16. He said, speaking the truth in love. So when we're judging something, when we're looking at someone, when we want balance and we want alignment, love is one of those features that brings in that concept. Paul says that speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way. You could say this, every sense. Every sense. We're to grow up into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. This understanding of how we see people, how we look at people, this buffer, this balance and alignment of love must be part of our measurement in our system. When Jesus instructed his disciples in this area of judgment, he knew that if they could not grasp the impact, this truth is for us too, if they could not grasp the impact of having two measures in the area of judgment, they would not be united in purpose and they would not be respected in action. I wonder if over the years the church has kind of gained that reputation. The church sometimes is much harder on their own than the world is. Can I tell you, this room is not and has never had one perfect person in it. I know for some of you, you're like, that surprised me right there. Not one of us are perfect. Not one of us. On our best day, we're imperfect. Actually, on our best day, our righteousness, the Bible describes as a filthy rag. That's our best day. That's the day we're feeling good about ourselves. That's a day that we actually think that we probably have a good sense of judgment in this situation. Jesus is saying, hey, listen, be careful. Be careful with this. Two measures, how you see others, how you think others should be judged, how you think it should go down. Listen, he's saying, you better stay close here. Listen, I've brought you up on the side of this mountain. This may not be a conversation for the crowds because they're going to want their own way and they're going to have all these ideas that, listen, you got to look at me on this. He's the author and perfecter of their faith. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. In our judgment, our measures of how we measure judgment on ourselves and on others, listen, we can't waver in that. It all has to come through Christ and his love. He takes it further, more specific in context in the next verses. So he follows up, he says, Matthew 7, 3 through 5, he says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice that the log that is in your own eye? I mean, think of that picture. It's like, I think you got something in your eye, and you got this like oak hanging out your eye, you know? That's the picture he's setting up. It's like, I think you got a problem here. Let me help you. Hang on. Let me knock your other eye out with this log in my eye. I mean, that's the picture he's setting up. Just such a huge contrast. He's just talked about measures, and now he's talking about why do you do that and you don't recognize this? He says, or can you say to your brother, let me take this speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye? He says, he calls it for what it is. You hypocrite. You hypocrite. I mean, we know what a hypocrite is. I mean, we could have all kinds of different definitions, but it's saying one thing, doing another. I see that speck you got. I see that, oh yeah, that's a real mess. And you got this massive thing hanging out your own eye. Here's what's interesting. He goes, you hypocrite. He doesn't say, don't look at that speck in their eye. Ignore that speck in their eye. He doesn't say that. He says this, first take the log out of your own eye. All right, get things straight with the Lord. Give what you have going on to the Lord. Let him take care of that. He doesn't say go ignore what's going on over here. But he says you got to have the right measure. And he says, and you got to let me take care of this. He says, first take care of the log in your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Again, that love, that I'm in this to help you. I'm not in this to judge you. I'm not in this to tell you just how bad your life is. Listen, my life's bad too. But Jesus, he's changed it. And I want to tell you about him. See, this is the context of what Jesus is telling his disciples here. They got to get it at this level. Church, we got to get it at that level. The world needs us to get it at that level. The situation is a result of a double standard of measure. Secondly, regarding sense and nonsense, Jesus spoke of two masks. First, he spoke of two measures. Then he spoke of two masks in this teaching. It's the mask you use to hide and the mask you use to help. See, the truth is we all wear masks. Masks come in so many different ways. Somebody ever come up to you and you're having a bad day? You know, it's rough. Let's say you're a Vikings fan, and it's okay. You're a Packers fan, and you're having a rough day, or you're a Dallas fan, you know. And I mean, we just go down through the, or a Dolphin fan. I mean, I'm just careful how you judge right now, okay? Just careful. Well, let's say you're having a bad day, and somebody comes up to you. And they say, hey, I sense something's wrong. And you go, no, it's all good. Are you having a good day? Oh, yeah, I'm having a great day. And you go on. That's a mask. That's a type of mask. I mean, we all wear masks. We all do. But is your mask that you wear most of the time, is it a mask to help or is it a mask to hide kind of what's going on? We have a virus going on, the coronavirus, right? Global Not real sure. They're doing research. Evidently, there's 8 people now diagnosed. Somebody died in the Philippines, I think overnight. Not sure how it's playing out, but it is playing out. And you see, in China particularly, you see people wearing masks. And what's interesting is some of them are wearing masks to keep from getting what they could get, and some are wearing masks to keep from giving what could be given in the form of a virus. And we wear a mask for so many different reasons, and Christians are no different. Spiritually, there's no difference in how we wear masks. The dilemma Jesus' disciples then and now were encountering was that they needed Jesus because of the disease that was going around called sin. This disease, this virus that was going around, that's why Jesus came, this virus, this thing called sin, because ultimately it kills you. Ultimately it brings death, it brings destruction. There is no hope with this disease but Jesus. That's it. And Jesus' disciples were just like disciples of today. They were broken people trying to help broken people. I mean, at the end of the day, the people on the side of that mountain were no more special or elevated than you and I. They had to understand, they had to follow Jesus. They had to cover themselves with Christ, this mask. But then you have to decide, am I going to cover myself with Christ to hide who I am or to help those who need help? It's the same dilemma. People of sense and nonsense trying to follow him and make a difference in the lives of others. People who in context could put on a good mask and make people think they were not sick or something they were not. I mean, we see this all the time. See, Jesus doesn't provide a covering for you and for me so that we can hide who we are. At the end of the day, you and I are sinners saved by grace. At the end of the day, we're no better than the person who has done the most heinous crime, than the person who is still continuing in the most heinous taboo acts, but Jesus. That covering of Christ in our lives, which at the end of service we're going to celebrate in communion. Masks have a way of covering reality. And the question becomes, is the mask you're wearing as a disciple of Christ one that is on to hide who you are or to help others? Masks are worn to protect both the patient and the personnel, especially if dealing with a virus and dealing with sin. Ephesians, again, the Apostle Paul, he says in Ephesians 6:10 through 11, he says, finally, he says, be strong. He says, be strong in the Lord. He says, and in the strength of his might. Don't just proclaim it. Yeah, I'm just gonna trust God, but you're gonna actually let God work in and through you. He says, put on, cover, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. This covering, this mask, this covering of the whole armor of God. Whose armor is it? God's armor. It's not the armor of religion. It's not the armor of some catechism I went through. It's the armor of God that is covering me, that is masking not who I am, but is covering me from the attacks of the enemy, is covering me so that I not only receive the benefit, but that I can be a benefit. That's what Jesus is talking about. These two measures, these two masks, right? Masking how bad a person I am and cloaking it with religion, or am I simply putting on the whole armor of God and saying, God, use me. God, I know you've got me. Lord, help me get others for you. A hypocrite would put on the things of God as a cover-up of their unrighteousness, but a disciple of Christ would put on the things of God as a help, to be a help in the battle of life. So Jesus, he offered his disciples, and he offers us an opportunity to live life through him. That's the opportunity. That's the relationship. That even though we are not perfect, again, none of us are, we are being perfected as we use his measures and cover ourselves with his righteousness. Peter was one of those disciples that was on the side of the mountain that day. Peter, of all people, he knew what it was to put his foot in his mouth. He knew what it was to have a sense about a situation and be completely wrong in it. I mean, he's one of the closest followers of Jesus. Think about it. At one point, he is so zealous. He is so, we would say, in love with Jesus, that he goes, Jesus, I'll never let that happen to you. I will protect you. I will take care. I will make sure they never get at you. I will. And what does Jesus say? What he's impressed by Peter's sense. He says, get behind me, Satan. Well, that ain't good. But Jesus, I really sense that you appreciated my zeal for you, and I really sense that that was the right thing to do, when in reality, it's not only the wrong thing to do, he's equated to Satan. Get behind me, Satan. That's something Satan would say, because you don't understand. You don't sense what I'm doing. You're thinking in a world's terms that is nonsense. So this is Peter. He's on the side of that mountain. He's with all these other folks, closest disciples at this point to Christ, ultimately would give their life for that cause. And he writes this. He writes this idea of measures and masks, the sense and nonsense of double standards and being covered, not because of who we are, but because of who Jesus is. Peter said, 1 Peter 4, 7 through 10, he says, the end of all things is at hand. He says, therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded. In other words, be of good sense, spiritual sense, self-controlled, sober-minded. I mean, he knew what it was to not have that. So now he knows what it is to need that. For the sake of your prayers, he says. I mean, I can't think of much worse situations to be praying wrong. To be praying in my own senses, to be praying in what I think makes sense, and asking the Lord to bless that, when in reality, that's not what I want God to do, because I'm not fully aware of what God's doing, and for him to do that would negate what he's doing on a bigger scale. Peter gets this. Remember, he was on the side of the mountain when this message was given. He gets the need for this, the understanding of a sense about what God is doing. He says, for the sake of your prayers, and he says, verse 8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly. Sincere love covers, it masks in the right sense. Sincere love, a multitude of sins. He says, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. And as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. God's varied grace. I mean, Jesus, he talked about two measures. He talked about two masks regarding sense and nonsense. Thirdly, Jesus spoke of two misses. Two misses. His disciples had to get this. The first miss, the miss that dishonors the things of God, and the second is the dismiss that endangers the things of God. I mean, the miss that dishonors the things of God. I mean, what if God gave you a gift? I mean, wouldn't that be special? I mean, if God literally, it came down like you see him, you know this is from God, and he gives you a gift, wouldn't you think that gift's pretty special? I mean, the Creator, the omnipotent one, the omniscient one, the omnipresent one gives you a gift. I mean, you would probably treat that not the same as you would a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You go, but I really like peanut butter and jelly, right? That special gift, wouldn't it be amiss to take the things of God, the holy things, just throw it down? Here, just give it to the dogs. Or to take something special like maybe a calling, an inclination. You ever prayed and you feel in your spirit, you sense in your spirit. You didn't before you prayed, but now that you've prayed, you sense it. So it wouldn't be any more real than the voice of God. You sense an anointing, you sense a direction, a calling. I mean, this is why people will say, you know what, I'm going to leave everything I know and I'm going to go be a missionary. I mean, we would say that's a treasure, that's a gift, that's likened to a pearl. We wouldn't just throw that away. God, just go ahead and call somebody else. Go ahead and anoint somebody else. Go ahead and use somebody else. I know you spoke it to me, but I'm just going to throw it away. I mean, wouldn't that have ramifications? I mean, Jesus, he's talking about 2 measures. He's talking about 2 masks, but these 2 misses he goes into. Matthew 7:6, he says, do not give dogs what is holy. And he says, do not throw your pearls before pigs. He says, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. I mean, there's a miss here that if I take what is holy and I just throw it out as likened to the dogs on the street. A lot of times, you ever been to a foreign country? A lot of times there's dogs running around. Years ago, I went on a missions trip to Venezuela. I went on a missions trip to Macedonia. And one of the things in some of the rougher parts of town, there were dogs running everywhere. You weren't to pet the dogs. They weren't friendly. They weren't pets. They're strays. I see that picture in my mind to take something holy from God and to just go, well, right now, I don't really have the time to deal with it. I really don't have the time to take care of this. I just, whatever. I think a lot of times people are doing that. Or they have something in their spirit, something in their heart that God's given them. I mean, this is a pearl. This is something special, and they just I'm just going to deal with it. I'll just use it for this, and it turns back on them. It's not good. Jesus is warning his disciples of this. Be careful how you judge people. Be careful how you look at people, and know that you need me to look at you and take care of you, this log in your eye, and above all else, don't treat what I give you as unholy. Don't treat what I give you as flippant. Don't treat what I have presented to you as something that you could just throw out or cast off. See, what God has provided us through Jesus, his Son, is more than a second chance. It's our only hope. It's more than just a suggestion for a good life. It's our only hope, church. And what he offered his disciples on that mountain is what he offers you and me today. I close with this. What he offers is precious, it's valuable, and it's priceless. It's priceless. If you've ever watched the Antiques Roadshow and people bring in stuff or whatever, and this one lady, she brought in this thing. It looked like a doorstop, and that's what she had used it for. It was a doorstop. It wasn't a doorstop. I forget what it was, but she brings it in, and they start looking at it. Anyway, this thing is like worth tens of thousands of dollars, and she was using it as an outside doorstop. Well, I bet she didn't do that anymore, See, what Jesus has to offer us sometimes in our senses, in a world sense, we go, it's nonsense. I can tell you that Jesus will never offer you nonsense. But the world may say it is. What Jesus offers us is priceless. Priceless. To have something and you go, well, I've had this for a long time and I just don't really know the value of it. And to have a determination of value that's priceless, I bet you treat it different. See, what he offers you is priceless. How have you been treating that? And it's not because you're more special than someone else. And it's not because you're good enough or you deserve it. This is huge. It's because he loves you. The creator of heaven and earth specifically loves you. That's priceless. That's priceless, church.